Have you ever apologized for taking up space? Or do you feel guilty for resting? Do you struggle to receive compliments, love, help, or even money? Do you somehow feel responsible for everyone else's happiness? And perhaps the strangest thing of all, even when you've done absolutely nothing wrong, you still feel guilty. If that sounds familiar, this video may explain why. Because today I want to talk about one of the deepest Bach Flower remedies of all, pine. And pine is not simply about guilt, it is about the person who secretly feels that they themselves are the problem. Hi and welcome, my name is Michelle, I'm a Bach Flower practitioner and vibrational healer, and on this channel we explore, of course, Bach Flower remedies, emotional healing and the deeper spiritual meaning behind our struggles. And if you often feel emotionally stuck, overwhelmed by guilt, anxiety or difficult patterns that you can't seem to break free from, I would love to invite you to my free masterclass. There I'll show you how I personally use Bach Flower remedies to work layer by layer and create a healing plan that is truly personal. You'll find the link below, and if you want to work one-on-one with me for 90 days, you can also find my link for that as well. Now let's talk about pine. So what does pine feel like? Or being in a pine state feel like? So most people think guilt means I made a mistake and I feel guilty. And that is certainly true, but pine goes deeper. It's almost like it says, I am the mistake. And that changes everything. Because when you believe that something is fundamentally wrong with you, life becomes exhausting. You apologize constantly, you blame yourself for things that aren't your fault. You take responsibility for everyone's emotions. And even when something wonderful happens, you somehow find a reason why you don't deserve it. Many pine people can't even enjoy success or joy. Someone compliments them and they answer, oh, it wasn't really that good. Or someone offers them help and they say, oh no, I don't want to bother you. You recognize it? I surely do. Now, someone gives them a gift and they can feel immediately very uncomfortable. I recognize that too. Because receiving itself feels almost wrong. So let's have a look at that a little bit deeper. Pine is somehow the person who says sorry for existing. So pine people often say a dozen times per day, sorry. Sorry for asking a question, sorry for needing help, sorry for being tired, sorry for being sick, sorry for taking up space, sorry for having needs. Sometimes it almost feels as if they are apologizing for existing. And perhaps you recognize this. Everyone around you thinks you're so kind and responsible and reliable and generous. And yet inside, you carry a secret burden because no matter what you do, it never really feels good. So let me tell you a little bit of my own personal story. So for me personally, one of the biggest themes connected to pine has been exhaustion, because guilt consumes energy, constant self-criticism consumes energy, trying to be perfect consumes a lot of energy, self-punishment as a form of guilt takes energy. Trying to compensate for imaginary sins consumes a lot of energy, and eventually the body says, I can't do this anymore. Many pine people become deeply tired, not because they are lazy, not because they are weak, but because unconsciously they are constantly punishing themselves, and punishment also steals joy. So where does this really come from? So sometimes the cause is very obvious. Perhaps you genuinely made a mistake. Perhaps something happened recently and you're simply trying to forgive yourself. You're struggling to forgive yourself. But often pine goes even deeper, goes much deeper, because people grew up being blamed for everything. Some became the family scapegoat. Some children absorbed the message, you're too much, you're too difficult, you're disappointing. Others grew up hearing things like, oh, we hoped for a boy, but, it's fine. Things like that, you ruined everything, or it was better when you weren't there, I don't know what. Now, if these words were never really spoken directly, children are still incredibly sensitive. And over time, they begin to carry burdens that never really belong to them. So what we also see in children with pine is that many pine children literally become the one who gets blamed. And eventually they stop asking who's responsible because they already know the answer. Me. Even if it wasn't them, even when they were innocent. So the pattern literally reinforces itself, attracting blame. And years of hearing that message becomes very difficult to separate yourself from guilt. Now, there's also more of a spiritual side to pine. So pine is a very deep remedy because eventually guilt becomes separation, not separation from other people, but separation from love itself. The person becomes so focused on their imperfections that they forget something very important. Human beings are not supposed to be perfect. We learn through mistakes, we grow through mistakes, we mature through mistakes. Imagine learning a child to walk. Would you hate that child for falling? Of course not. Then why do we treat ourselves differently? Why do we expect perfection from ourselves while allowing humanity in everyone else? Pine people often live according to impossible standards, standards they would never impose on another person. The deep spiritual meaning of pine. So this is where pine becomes much more than simply feeling guilty. Because ultimately, pine is not really about mistakes, it's about separation. The personality becomes so focused on its own imperfections that it forgets to listen to something much higher. Our soul is perfect, not our personality, not our body, not our thoughts, not our emotions. The soul itself is already whole. And the tragedy of pine is that the personality begins to judge itself according to its own standards of good and bad and gradually loses contact with the wisdom of the higher self. And this has enormous consequences because when you secretly believe, I don't deserve love, I don't deserve happiness, I don't deserve abundance, you're not simply rejecting other people, you are rejecting life itself, almost as a cardinal sin. But remember that Jesus already made his offer for you. That's what pine is here to teach you. It's almost as if a baby connected to its mother through the umbilical cord would suddenly decide, I am not worthy of receiving nourishment. Of course, the mother never stopped loving the child. The flow never stopped, but the child closes itself to receiving, and something similar happens spiritually. Divine love never stops flowing. The higher self never abandons us. God does not suddenly stop loving us because we made mistakes, but pine personalities often close themselves to that stream. They disconnect themselves from the very source that wishes to nourish them. And because life itself is love, the self-rejection slowly becomes exhaustion. They also disconnect themselves from energy. And fighting against love also consumes tremendous energy. Many pine people become physically tired because unconsciously they are trying to live without receiving, without help, without rest, without abundance, without forgiveness, without love, all with the purpose of self-punishment. But this was never the purpose of life. You did not come here to be perfect. Your soul is already perfect. You came here to become human, to learn, to fall, to make mistakes, to grow, to develop compassion, to discover wisdom. And without mistakes, there can be no learning. Without conflict, there can be no growth. Without falling, there can be no rising again. And perhaps one of the greatest spiritual illusions is believing that perfection brings us closer to God. Very often, it is our own brokenness that brings us closer. Our mistakes humble us, our suffering opens our hearts. Our failures teach compassion, and gradually we discover something extraordinary. Nothing separates us from divine love except our belief that we are separated. The invitation of pine is therefore not to become better, it is to become willing to receive again, to say, I forgive myself, I allow myself to be loved, I allow myself to receive. I trust that my soul already knows the way, because healing does not happen through punishment. Healing happens through reconnection. And when pine finally transforms, something beautiful happens. The person stops trying to earn love and simply begins to receive it, and suddenly enormous amounts of life force become available again. Because the stream was always there. The only thing that's changed was our willingness to open ourselves to it. Now let's have a little look at that difficulty receiving. So one thing I see again and again with pine is really the difficulty receiving. Love, compliments, money, rest, success, energy, opportunities. Because somewhere deep inside there is that conscious belief, I don't deserve it. And what happens? Life gives, but the person rejects. Not consciously, but automatically. Because receiving feels dangerous, it feels selfish, it feels wrong, like a cardinal sin almost. And over time, the person slowly cuts themselves off completely from life's natural flow. That's why often pine types are exhausted. Sometimes guilt becomes really a form of self-punishment, and this may sound strange, but some people almost need to suffer, not consciously, but unconsciously. If life doesn't punish them, they punish themselves. They overwork, they refuse pleasure, they stay in unhealthy relationships, they keep torturing themselves with repetitive thoughts and feelings. They don't ask for help, they deny themselves rest. You can probably recognize yourself in some of these. And sometimes they even feel responsible for carrying everyone else's pain. But my dear friend, you are not responsible for saving the whole world. And suffering does not make you more worthy. The positive potential of pine is such a beautiful thing. The beautiful thing is that pine people often become extraordinary human beings because once they heal, they develop immense compassion. They understand shame, they understand regret, they understand suffering so very deeply. And because of that, they become wonderful listeners and helpers. They know how to forgive. Not because they never made mistakes, but because they finally learned how to forgive themselves. Now, let's have a look at some practical things that can help besides pine itself. So it can be helpful to look honestly at where you demand perfection from yourself. Notice where you carry responsibility that belongs to others, or allow yourself to rest before exhaustion appears. Strengthen your physical vitality. Learn to receive small things to start with without apologizing, and perhaps repeat, I forgive myself, I allow myself to repeat, I deserve love, I have the right to exist, I am enough. Now, for those who are familiar with yoga and the chakra system, an interesting symbolic exercise to bring gentle awareness to the throat chakra, which forms a bridge between the heart and the mind. Now, in some spiritual traditions, the third eye is associated with wisdom and higher understanding, while the heart is associated with divine love and compassion. From a Christian symbolic perspective, some people have compared these qualities to Moses representing divine law and conscience, and Christ representing grace, mercy, and redemption. Pine personalities often become trapped in conscience without compassion. They remember the law, but they forget love. They remember their mistakes, but forget forgiveness. They remember what they should have done, but forget what has already been done for them. And in Christian spirituality, one could say that conscience alone belongs to Moses, but redemption belongs to Christ. The throat center situated between heart and mind can therefore symbolically represent reconciliation between truth and love, between justice and mercy, between conscience and forgiveness. Because according to the Christian understanding, we do not save ourselves through perfection. The work of atonement has already been accomplished. Nothing more needs to be added. Our task is not to punish ourselves endlessly, but to receive what has already been given. Therefore, for some people, gentle meditation on the connection between the heart and the higher mind, focusing on the throat chakra, may be very helpful, not to become more perfect, but to remember that they are already loved and that forgiveness is already available and that divine grace is greater than human guilt. Pine heals when conscience is reunited with love. So let's have a look at how to use pine if it resonates with you. So the simplest approach is to purchase the single remedy from your local health food store or your Bach Flower supplier or a pharmacy. You can simply add 2 drops of pine to a bottle of water and sip throughout the day. I generally recommend working with the remedy consistently for at least 4 weeks because Bach Flower remedies are very gentle and they often work layer by layer. Of course, pine can also be combined beautifully with other remedies. For example, pine is often seen together with remedies such as Centaury, oak, red chestnut, white chestnut, star of Bethlehem, or walnut, depending on the deeper story behind the guilt. And if you're interested in learning how to combine these remedies and make your own personal treatment bottle, I have another video somewhere here explaining exactly how to do that. And even more important, why not come to my free live class where we'll be doing this together? You'll leave with insight, with tools, with your own personal starting point, whether you'd like to work with Bach Flower remedies or not, and you'd even leave with your own personal remedy formula. Sounds good? Come to the class. Thank Thank you so much for being here with me. I loved making this video, and I'll see you in the next one.